Okay, so things are not good for the Texas Army. Uh, Alamo's been captured, everyone killed. Goliad captured, everyone killed. The only good thing that had happened is that Santa Anna had given Sam Houston and the militia, the Texas Army, Revolutionary Army, a couple of weeks to kind of get organized. And then Houston starts he starts marching northeast to evade Santa Anna's army. Houston doesn't think that the Texas Army is strong enough to face Santa Anna's army. And this is an extremely interesting episode because where Houston is marching, if you look at the map when he's marching northeast, where's he marching? He's marching towards Louisiana. And of course, Louisiana is a well-established U.S. state. And it just so happens there were elements of the U.S. Army under an officer named Gaines sitting in Fort Jessup right across the Sabine River from Texas. And they're monitoring the events of Texas very, very carefully. And to this day, at the time, and to this day, there are people that think that what Houston was trying to do is he was trying to draw Santa Anna's army close to the United States so that the U.S. Army would cross the Sabine River, and then it would be the U.S. versus Mexico instead of the Texans versus Mexico. We don't know. There's no smoking gun evidence of this. But at the time, important Texans thought that this was what Houston's game plan was. Now, at the same time that this is happening, you have what's called the Runaway Scrape. And the Runaway Scrape is kind of an embarrassing moment in Texas history. What happens is, after Goliad especially, Anglo-American civilians in East Texas, they just completely panic. They saw what had happened in San Antonio. They saw what had happened in Goliad. They're terrified that Santa Anna is going to come into East Texas and start murdering them as well. He certainly had proved himself a ruthless officer. And so what you have with the Runaway Scrape is Anglo-American settlers in East Texas bolt towards Louisiana. And of course, the reason they're bolting towards Louisiana is once they're on U.S. soil, Santa Anna wouldn't dare go into the United States. I mean, he just wouldn't have. It would have not. It was not in his plan. So, what you have after the Alamo and after Goliad is this frenzied refugee. Really, it's a refugee retreat of Anglo-Americans in East Texas towards Louisiana. And the weather that spring was very, very cold. It was hard and wet. It was hard to cross the rivers. It was a very, very miserable experience, the Runaway Scrape. You know, it's kind of branded in an amusing way, you know, the Runaway Scrape. But it was not fun. It was not fun. It was pretty miserable. Some people died along the way. And so as the Anglo-Americans that had settled in Texas, as they got closer to Louisiana, as they got into Nacogdoches, they tended to settle down and just wait for events. And if the Mexican army won, they would just pop over into the United States, and they would have lost their property, but they would have survived. And if the Texans won by some miracle, it didn't look like that was going to happen, well, they would remain in Texas. Okay, so that's the Runaway Scrape. So now back to Sam Houston. So Sam Houston is retreating east and northeast with his men towards San Jacinto, which is in the kind of the eastern part of Houston today. The battlefield is a very well-visited site. And his army gets fed up with Sam Houston. We don't know what Sam Houston was thinking. We didn't know if he wanted to draw the U.S. Into the Texas Revolution. We don't know if Houston just thought it was smarter to retreat rather than to face the Mexican army because, you know, he was outnumbered. We don't know. But the reason that the Battle of San Jacinto happens is that the troops force Sam Houston's hand. They just stop marching, and they tell him, "Look, were not marching anymore. Their bloodlust was up because of the what had happened at Goliad, what had happened at the Alamo, and they wanted to fight Mexicans. They wanted to face the Mexican army and fight the Mexican army. And so what happens is, as Santa Anna, elements of Santa Anna's army moves towards the San Jacinto River, the position there, Santa Anna gets lazy. He gets overconfident. Remember, he's not a very competent military leader. And you have the two armies facing off against one another. But what you need to remember is that not all of Santa Anna's army fought at San Jacinto. Only elements of Santa Anna's army fought at San Jacinto. So keep that in mind. So what you have on April 21st, 1836, is the Texans surprise the Mexicans. The Mexican army did not anticipate an attack by the Texans. Again, Santa Anna is terrible as a general. And the Texans go in, and they win the victory very, very quickly. The Mexican army is so surprised that it's defeated. And then you have what I call the third massacre of the Texas Revolution. The Texas army, their blood is up because of what had happened at Goliad, what had happened at the Alamo, start murdering Mexican soldiers. And by far the largest massacre of the Texas Revolution was not the Alamo, which is not really a massacre, it was a battle, was not Goliad, which was a war crime, it was San Jacinto. Because the Texas troops, after the Mexican army surrendered, continued murdering Mexican soldiers, killing Mexican soldiers, even after the Mexican army had retreated. Sam Houston himself almost gets killed because he's riding around trying to stop the killing of Mexican soldiers after San Jacinto. So we don't know for sure, but maybe somewhere along the lines of 500 or 600 Mexican soldiers were killed after the defeat of the Mexican army at San Jacinto. So 3 massacres in the Texas Revolution. The first, the Alamo, the second, Goliad, but one that's often forgotten on this side of the Rio Grande, but it's not forgotten on the other side of the Rio Grande, on the Mexican side, is the massacre of Mexican soldiers after the Texans surprise Santa Anna's army on April 21st, 1836. But the big story, if you can move away from the battlefield and all the suffering and the dying and the murder and that kind of a thing, the killing of soldiers that had surrendered, the big story is this, that miraculously, and probably in large part because of Santa Anna's total ineptitude as a general, the Texans have defeated the Mexican army. And suddenly now, Santa Anna's captured like a day or two later. There's this story that he was dressed as a woman. You often hear this in the 19th century. It kind of emasculates a general by saying that they were dressed like a female. Of course, they would dress like a female in order to escape. Santa Anna's captured. He agrees to give Texas its independence, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. So miraculously, Texas has gained its independence after San Jacinto. Now, this is what infuriates Peña, because the entire Mexican army still outnumbered the Texas army even after San Jacinto. San Jacinto was not a defeat of the entire Mexican army. The entire Mexican army still outnumbered the Texas army. But what happened is, and this drove Peña up the wall, and this is one of the things that he wanted the Mexican people to know because they didn't know it. Santa Anna had basically stabbed the Mexican people in the back by surrendering to the Texans, by agreeing to Texas independence, even though there was a large Mexican army in Mexican Texas. I guess it's not Mexican Texas anymore. And what happens is 2 of his generals, Filosola, who Peña hates with a passion, And Urea, who Pena admires, they have to decide whether or not to continue fighting. And Filasola outranks Urea, and ultimately Filasola agrees, and he leads a retreat of the Mexican army back into Mexico, the so-called Mud March. It's a very horrific experience for the Mexican army. It's nasty weather. It's wet. The Mexican army's defeated. But after San Jacinto, under the orders of Santa Anna, even when the Mexican army still could have continued the campaign, what happens is, under the orders of General Filasola, the Mexican army retreats back across the Rio Grande. The Mexican Revolution, or the Texas Revolution, miraculously is over, and the Texans have gained their independence.